As human societies grew from scattered tribes into complex civilizations, we designed aqueducts, wrote laws, and built monuments to our own enlightenment. But this evolution didn't erase our capacity for cruelty. It simply made it more engineered, allowing us to find increasingly methodical ways to inflict pain. The most devastating acts of history were rarely committed by monsters in the shadows. Instead, they were carried out in broad daylight by trusted authorities, generals, priests, and doctors, who operated with the full support of the state. By examining these methods, we can see the specific ways societies rebranded torture, dressing it up as military justice, or religious salvation, or even modern medicine. This ability to manufacture a moral justification is what allows these practices to persist, providing a structured and socially acceptable framework for extreme violence to thrive. This morable relief captures the rigid formation of a Roman army built on unyielding military discipline. To the Roman state, any soldier who broke rank or showed cowardice was a threat to the stability of the entire empire. To restore order after a mutiny, commanders used a process called decimation. A cohort of nearly 500 men was divided into groups of 10, with no regard for which individuals were actually guilty of a crime. Within each group, the soldiers drew lots. The one who pulled the short straw was immediately executed, often beaten or stabbed to death by the 9 closest friends he had served alongside. The survivors were then banished to sleep outside the safety of the camp, carrying the weight of their comrade's death as a permanent reminder of the price of failure. Centuries later, the Inquisition used these same formal tribunals to justify physical suffering. To the Church, a forced confession wasn't an act of cruelty, but a necessary step to save an accused heretic's soul from eternal damnation. The mechanical nature of this spiritual salvation is evident in the tools they engineered, like the heretic's fork. This double-sided metal device was strapped tightly between the victim's chest and their chin. The device forced the accused into an agonizing choice: remain perfectly upright through days of sleep deprivation, or let their head drop from exhaustion and impale their own throat on the metal prongs. By framing violence as a requirement of faith or national security, these institutions turned the victims and their peers into the direct instruments of their own torture. In the 1940s, the venue for extreme physical intervention shifted to hospital wards like this one. Here, rows of metal beds provided a sterile environment where doctors reframed trauma as medical innovation. Faced with overcrowded asylums, the medical community celebrated the transorbital lobotomy. It was promoted globally as a miraculous cure that could stabilize patients suffering from severe mental health disorders. Despite its surgical reputation, the procedure was a crude, blind scrambling of the brain. Using this wooden-handled metal tool, a doctor would hammer through the eye socket into the frontal lobe, frequently without using any anesthesia. More than 50,000 patients underwent the procedure. They weren't cured of their illnesses. Instead, the physical trauma to their brains left them permanently damaged and docile. This era saw the rise of insulin shock therapy. Using standard tools like this vintage kit, doctors administered massive overdoses to induce prolonged comas. The physical strain caused forced seizures and permanent damage. The dosage markers highlight the dangerous levels forced into the patient's systems. When the patients emerged from these comas unresponsive and lethargic, the medical establishment logged these results as a successful calming of their conditions. Because it happened in a hospital under a doctor's care, the scientific community was able to mistake horrific brain damage for a medical success. To find the extreme limit of this logic, we return to the Persian Empire, where the uncontested authority of the king was used to issue sentences that served as ultimate warnings against rebellion. This led to the practice of scaphism, a punishment reserved exclusively for the most high-profile traitors to the Persian crown. The prisoner was trapped between 2 boats in a swamp, then force-fed and covered in a mixture of milk and honey to induce severe diarrhea. This mixture acted as a biological catalyst. It effectively turned the prisoner's body into a host for the local ecosystem, drawing wasps, flies, and rats to the boats. The insects and rodents would systematically consume the victim's flesh, while the prisoner remained conscious, being eaten from both the outside in and the inside out. To maximize the deterrence, executioners rode out daily to feed the victims, artificially extending the rotting process. One recorded victim was kept alive in this state for 17 days. This extreme punishment shows how authority can use torture to go beyond a simple execution, systematically erasing a human being to create a visible psychological warning for the rest of the population. Comparing the Persian executioner to the 20th century psychiatrist reveals neither viewed themselves as a villain. Both believed their actions were entirely justified by the laws, religious texts, or scientific consensus that defined their era. The primary takeaway from these accounts is how easily human morality can be reshaped when it is filtered through the instructions of power. When authority operates without oversight, and when a society stops questioning those in charge, we become capable of justifying almost any act of cruelty. The tools and the settings of torture change with every century, but the human capacity to rationalize the results remains constant.